seekers of wisdom and wanderers of the mind. Welcome to Zest2live. I'm your host Mithilesh, and today's inaugural first episode marks a beginning of a transformative journey of yours with me and my guest, and the threads of spirituality, science, and the profound art of living. Our guest today actually needs no grand introduction. But I cannot help myself from sharing the brilliance that Allison Jayne is, a seasoned psychotherapist, EFT practitioner, and a best selling author. Allison has immersed herself in the transformative dance between the mind, body, and soul. Today, we embark on a journey to unravel the science and the philosophy behind powerful practice of emotional freedom technique as Alison shares her insight on tapping into our true potential from relieving intense emotion to managing stress. EFT is a versatile tool that has left its mark across the vast landscape of human experience. But that's not all. Allison's latest book, Find Love Again, Learn to Date Like a Goddess, is a testament to her true commitment to guiding others in clearing blocks and unhealthy patterns around love and relationships. And by the way, whether you just discovered us or you have been eagerly anticipating this very moment, the essence of Zest to Live lies in the raw, natural, and insightful conversations that unfold with you. So, as we embark on this maiden voyage, sit back, relax, and enjoy. So, Alison, first of all, welcome to Zest to Live. And, it's so great to have you today on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Alison, there's so much that we're going to talk about today, about what you do and something that is behind you also. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about many things. But, first, let's just go back. Let's just go back a long, long back when you started your journey. Like, and, I'll start from the very beginning of it. All my guests, I do that, is their childhood. How was your childhood like? And, from there, what take you or took you there when you discovered the transformative power of EFT. So, can you take us through your journey from your childhood?
Yeah, sure. I would say, a pretty typical childhood. I have reflected many times over what are all the things that I've sort of worked through as an adult based on my childhood. And what I refer to them as sort of little T traumas, right? So, not I've been very fortunate not to have to experience really big traumas, but little things like accidentally getting separated from my parents in a store or being, teased by neighborhood kids, things that are impactful, but, not necessarily life altering. However, what's been really interesting is as I've delved into my personal growth and change work as an adult, I realized that some of these little T traumas can have a really big impact on the trajectory of one's life and your self-concept and your mental health and all these kinds of things.
So, what took you there to start discovering EFT? Like, how did that journey begin? And what took you there?
Yeah, I think that I originally went into being a social worker largely because I would say of my family and my family's values. So my grandparents had fostered over 50 kids throughout their lifetime. Foster care was different back then in the US, and it was more about if parents were convalescing in a hospital. Actually, to be honest, it was if the mother was convalescing in a hospital, the father wasn't expected to take care of his kids per se. So kids would live with my grandparents for a few months and then move back in with their family when they could. And so we grew up with just this kind of mentality of really helping those less fortunate and giving a helping hand. And that's what led me to social work. So I went and I got a master's. And as some of your listeners might know, a lot of social workers these days do actual therapy more than case management or some of the other things. And I've sort of done it all. I've worked in child welfare for a long time. I worked in the inner city of Chicago, working with victims of extreme trauma and poverty and things like that. And when I was doing some of that work, what I found with my clients was they could have really good insight into what was going on with them, why they were behaving in ways that were self sabotaging, yet they still couldn't change. And so I started getting curious about this because when you get trained as a therapist, you get trained to help your clients find insight into their behavior and maybe connect it to their childhood and things like that. And yet I was doing that. I was doing that successfully. My clients really were connecting the dots, and yet they couldn't change. So I started exploring what other things might be going on here. And that took me into the realm of sort of mind body and looking at how the trauma and the self sabotaging behavior can really kind of be in our bodies, can kind of live in our bodies. And so I started doing different, what a lot of people would consider sort of alternative medicine things, working with my clients with yoga, progressive muscle relaxation, just trying various mind body techniques. And at one point, I needed to get some continuing education for my social work license. And so I signed up for a training in this thing I had sort of vaguely heard about, EFT tapping. And I went to the first 2 days of the training and I just fell in love with it. And so I decided to stay for the rest of the training and I signed up for the certification program on the spot. And I knew right away that I had found this thing I had been looking for my clients, which was the tool to actually take the insight and create the actual emotional, mental change that everyone is hoping for when they're struggling with something.
So, it changed the way you do coaching, and you were in the social working a worker, and then you got the license, I believe, and then
Yep.
it turned it around, and this was a significant part and is a significant part of your life, I feel.
Hmm.
But because you're a psychotherapist, and that's not a like a new one, a seasoned, I would say.
Right.
I've used the word. So you've been doing it for a while. How
Yeah.
do you integrate EFT into it, basically? And what kind of results have you observed in your clients? So I think our listeners might be curious about that. What kind of results has it bring to your clients?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I have been a psychotherapist for over 20 years. And once I discovered EFT, I actually went full in on EFT. And I don't do traditional talk therapy anymore because I found that this is so much more powerful. I have had clients say, wow, I've been working on this issue for 7 years in regular talk therapy, and you just cleared it up for me in 4 sessions. I mean, these are the kinds of results that I get. Because what happens to us when we experience traumatic things in our childhood, particularly, or in adulthood, is our body goes into one of three modes: fight, flight, or freeze. And for most of us, it's actually freeze. And so your trauma kind of gets you frozen in time and space. Or if it's flee that you go into, you keep avoiding your problems, which means maybe not being able to stay in relationships, maybe changing jobs often. That's kind of flee behavior, is you're always trying to move on because you can't kind of sit in the difficultness of whatever it is that's going on in your life. And then the fight is sort of obvious. Maybe you pick a lot of fights, or you just tend to engage in sort of destructive behavior, self-destructive or destructive. A lot of people in fight might be using substances to try to prevent them from getting argumentative or getting into trouble and things like that, or also just to numb out. So when you are stuck in one of these patterns of fight, flight, or freeze, that is when no amount of talking can get you out of that, because that is a body reaction. You are doing those fight, flight, freeze in your body. And so when you're talking to a therapist and just sort of mentally trying to work your way out of it, you're never going to be able to do it. I believe it was Albert Einstein who said the you can't solve the level of the problem, or you can't solve the problem at the level that the problem was created, right? So you have to go beyond the mind and into the body to try to actually get the change. So what happens with the EFT tapping is it sends a calming signal to the fight, flight, freeze part of your brain, to the amygdala, and it basically shuts it off. And so when you process certain things, specific things, and you shut off that neural pathway, let's say it was a car accident, and now every time you get behind the wheel, you get kind of shaky and anxious and nervous because of this bad car accident. That's a neural pathway from your memory of the car accident to your fight, flight, freeze center, to your amygdala. And when you do the tapping, you're tapping on specific acupressure points, which I know we're going to get more into. But what that does is it sends this calming signal. It's like pouring water onto the fire of an emotion, and it shuts off that amygdala going into overdrive, and it creates a new neural pathway that then connects that memory up to your frontal lobe. And the great thing about our frontal lobe is that's where our logic, reason, and judgment center is in our brain. There's no emotion. The emotion centers are in the mid and hindbrain. And so now you can still remember the thing that happened to you, but you no longer have feelings about it. You don't get that anxiety. You don't get that flutter in your chest or those butterflies in your stomach, because those things come from the mid and hindbrain. Now you just remember the car accident, but it doesn't send you into any kind of panic or any kind of tizzy. I have clients all the time tell me after we've cleared a trauma with EFT, they say, wow, it feels like it's someone else's story. It's not that you don't, it's not that you forget it, because I've worked with people who are like vets, like war veterans, and they say, well, I don't want to forget. I would feel disloyal forgetting what happened there to my fallen comrades and things. You don't forget it, but it just moves it to a different part of your brain where it no longer creates suffering for you. It's a memory, you still remember it, you just don't have all that physiological and emotional reaction to it anymore.
So, it's really interesting about what you said. So, what I'm trying to understand is that could you explain the science behind EFT in the medical perspective, and how tapping, because you showed the specific points, people who are watching on the video, on a specific acupuncture points affects our nervous system. Yeah, because that's what I'm trying to understand. And what is the science behind this, and how does it work exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's been a lot of research to this point on it. And what they've generally done is they have tested people's blood and saliva levels pre tapping and post tapping session. There have also been studies done where they have people on EEGs, which is measuring the electrical activity in their brain. And so I always want to mention this because I think it's important for people to understand when you do the tapping, sometimes it actually feels pretty magical. Like I have cleared people's phobias in 10 minutes. I'm not even kidding, like lifelong phobias. So it feels sort of magical, but it's actually not. It's very scientific, and we have lots and lots of evidence to that. So what happens is when you do the tapping, what they found in these saliva and blood tests is that it very quickly lowers your body's production of cortisol, which is our stress hormone. So it basically turns off the production of the stress hormone, which then allows the body to turn on the production of DHEA, which is our human growth hormone that's responsible for repair and restoring of the cells in our body. Also, what we have found with the saliva blood test is actually you're impacting your genes. So the study of epigenetics, for anyone who's not familiar, is fascinating research, pretty cutting edge stuff. And what they're finding is that we actually can impact which genes turn on or turn off through environmental factors. And that can be things like diet and exercise, but it also can be with EFT tapping. because when you do the tapping, what they found is that it's turning on, sort of for oversimplification, but sort of like very good genes. It increases your immunoglobulin production, so your immune system is healthier. And why they believe this is happening, they have discovered from the EEG studies, which finds that when you start tapping on these particular acupressure points, they've tested people tapping just random points on their body. That doesn't seem to have the effect. So it is these specific 9 points that we're going to go over. When people tap on these points, they stimulate the body to move into what's known as alpha brainwave state. So most of us, when we're awake and we're, living our life, we're in beta. That's our awake state. A lot of us live most of our life in high beta, which is our stressful brainwave state. And most of us don't go into alpha until right before bed. So you go from beta to alpha to theta to delta, which is sleep. So alpha is sort of that relaxed, chilled out state. For those of you who meditate, you are in alpha brainwave state when you meditate. If you do yoga, at the end you do shavasana, most people will move into alpha brainwave state.
And theta?
And theta is sort of that woozy, dreamlike state where you're kind of awake and kind of asleep. That is, maybe you're lucid dreaming, you're aware of your dream, that kind of thing. That is theta. And then delta is REM, you are not conscious, right? So these are the brainwave states that we move into. And when you are in alpha, you are, first of all, your brain is highly suggestible. When someone gets hypnotized, they are in alpha. And secondly, and most importantly, your central nervous system moves into what's known as the parasympathetic nervous system state. So we are either in our sympathetic nervous system or our parasympathetic. There's no in between. It's like an on-off switch. When we are in our parasympathetic, that is our relax, rest, and repair state. So what happens there is you stop producing all these stress hormones like cortisol, which, by the way, is responsible for putting belly fat on. So I like to always tell people that because you want to lower your cortisol. And when you're in your parasympathetic state, you start producing all the good hormones, the oxytocin, the DHEA, the things that will help restore the body. And most of us are only in our parasympathetic state right before sleep for a few minutes a day. And we need more than that. Our
Yeah.
bodies cannot survive long time without, and be healthy, I should say, for a long time without spending time in our parasympathetic nervous system. So what I love so much about tapping is a lot of people struggle with meditating, right? They struggle with the idea of it. They can't sit still. They feel like they can't shut off their brain. With tapping, you can do something active, which is tapping on your acupressure points, yet you're getting the same results, the same sort of biological benefits of being in your parasympathetic nervous system as you would if you were meditating.
So, well, when I was reading your bio, you mentioned that versatile, that in treating with EFT, you mentioned that it helps in addressing conditions like PTSD,
Mhm.
depression, anxiety. And, a lot of these things you mentioned are only treatable by a lot of medicine, a lot of, I don't know,
Mhm.
maybe yoga, and it's really stressful. And,
Mhm.
anxiety is so common, PTSD is so common, depression is so common, and much more that you said. So, can you also share like a success story that highlights of these what I mentioned that has you have seen in your clients, and how could people use this method to because most people most of our listeners, if not, they're not suffering from phobias maybe, but they might be suffering from depression, they might be suffering from
Mhm.
a moment they are really stuck in life. So how can
Mhm.
this method help them? Can you highlight such a story?
Yeah, I can highlight a story. I can highlight sort of two different kind of versions. One, a longer term uh, client that I worked with who had significant childhood trauma, and then also sort of a shorter term, a one time trauma, if you will, kind of a story. So I know that this is not as common, but just to, because there are some of your listeners out there who have suffered from some pretty significant childhood trauma. I'll start with that one. And the way that we tap on trauma is we go through the story bit by bit, tapping along on the acupressure points to send that calming signal to turn off that fight or flight reaction to the story one piece at a time. But when you've had really significant childhood trauma, like this one client of mine, you can't even necessarily start by tapping on the story of the childhood trauma. Most people who've had significant trauma, they are so afraid to sort of open that box, to even go there, because they're afraid it's going to be so painful that it will just kill them, really. And so what I did with this client, and she was a client who had been pretty severely sexually abused as a child, and it was impacting all of her present day relationships. She was in her 40s and she was still single, and she just couldn't establish emotional intimacy. She couldn't establish physical intimacy. She was just really, really frozen because of what had happened. And she'd been in therapy for a long time, regular talk therapy, which she found helpful, but she couldn't seem to break out and actually date. And that was really the part that she was struggling with the most. And so when we started, instead of just sort of jumping into tell me the story of what happened to you, which creates way too much anxiety for most people, we actually started tapping on the idea of the possibility of talking about the story. And so we use a very specific technique in EFT when we do this, and it's called tearless trauma, or sneaking up on the trauma, some people call it. And basically, I have my clients vision, if your childhood story was a movie in the movie theater, and the curtain was closed on the screen, how far away from the screen should we start? Do we need to be in the back of the theater? Do we need to be out in the hall? Do we need to be down the street outside the building? Do we need to be in another town? Do we need to be on the moon? I will start wherever my client is. And I have had some people say the moon. This particular client said the town next door. And so that's simply what we started doing. Even though I'm in the town next door, and my childhood movie is playing in the theater, I'm okay. And so we started tapping down the anxiety and slowly getting closer and closer to the theater. And then once she was able to actually come inside the theater and open the curtain, then we were able to start tapping on the actual stories itself. So what we look for particularly with PTSD, is emotional spikes. So you might notice next time you're talking to someone, if they're telling you a story of something harrowing that they've been through, you'll see it in their body language. Their eyes get big, they lean forward, they tense up, they start using their hands,
They
or they're
experience those
gripping.
emotions. They experience those emotions like how they experience at that time, and it's hard to describe it.
Exactly. So it's their body is reliving in the trauma. Our body doesn't actually know the difference between a thought and the reality. So when you think a thought, and sometimes people laugh at me at that, but it's if you think of like a sexual fantasy, your body has a physiological reaction to thinking
Yeah.
about those thoughts, right? And so it's the same when you think of a trauma. Your body has a physiological reaction. It goes back to that trauma. And for some people, it might just be a freeze state. And so they might just get really frozen in their body and be really still. So what I do as a practitioner is I'm looking very carefully at my client's body language. I do see everybody online over Zoom, but I can see when they're in that physiological state, and I will stop them right then, and we will tap. And we will tap until I see their body relax, which it has to, because of that on off switch. The tapping will put you in the parasympathetic nervous system, whether you like it or not. So eventually I'll notice the relaxation, and then we'll kind of back up and tell through that piece of the story again, or that, where we're sitting in town again. And if they can talk about it now and be relaxed, then I know it's time to go on to the next piece.
So, yeah, I'll let you complete.
Okay, so I was just going to say, so with this client, we worked on it for about a year, and it took us about a year to get into the theater and then to work through the actual memories. And by the end of the year, she was able to be dating. And she said, it's miraculous. I feel like my life has completely transformed. And she would say often, I feel like it's someone else's story now. I am able to talk to my close friends about this. They always knew something had happened to me, but they didn't know what it was. She's like, I couldn't talk about it because she was frozen, right? She was like, I would get choked up. I just couldn't. Now I can talk about it. And I feel like it's just renewed, not just my dating life, but my friendships as well. So that was that one story.
That's a very significant story, definitely a very positive story to hear. And as everyone, if you, some are listening on YouTube, some are listening on Spotify, Apple Podcast. This is a Luvo original podcast, and when you make a account on Luvo app, the very first thing that you read is the tagline that great substantial changes take time to take effect. It is not a one
Hmm.
day thing that big changes happen in life. Transformation takes time, and this is something that you could see from your case. It's not a one day thing you can see, oh, I just tap and everything will be
Right.
walla walla. It will take some time, but it does affect. The same is with any practice you do, yoga, meditation. And
Hmm.
one thing before I highlight, before I forget it or we move to the next question that I have, is that you talked about these points, and
Hmm.
I'll also like to highlight this. In the 70s and in the 60s, this was not a really popular thing, but now people know about it. In Japan, in Korea, they have these martial art techniques,
Hmm.
karate to kendo. There are many kind of techniques they have, and in there they tell you, the guru, who teaches you the techniques, tells you about these points. One of them is somewhere in here. I don't know exactly, but somewhere around here. And if you use your thumb to, I don't know the exact point, and if you just do it rightly at the
Hmm.
exact point, that person can be paralyzed
Hmm.
instantly. And
Yeah.
and these kind of, there are points, and this is completely scientific. It is not a fantasy. If you look at,
Hmm.
there are points in our body that creates specific sensations. For
Yes.
example, I'll tell you, if you go to a blood test, why they select a specific point? Because they know that this is the point where the injection can go without a lot of pain. It is easy to pass
Hmm.
it through.
Hmm.
So it's very scientific, and our body has these structures and functions.
Yes.
Again, acupuncture has some mysticism to it,
Hmm.
but it also has a lot of science behind it, which cannot be
Yes,
ignored. So,
exactly.
my next question is that for someone who is really new to EFT, most of the listeners might be new who are listening to me right now to EFT. They
Hmm.
might have never heard this term EFT. So, how can they incorporate EFT tapping into their daily life for overall mental and physical well being? Because this is a daily life thing. That's what you were telling me before.
Right, exactly. And I want to back up and just say one thing. The other example that I was thinking about was actually a one-day transformation, a miraculous one. And I'll tell the story in a second. But I do want to emphasize exactly what you said, because for this particular client, she experienced a trauma and we worked through it in one EFT session, and her life is completely different as a result. However, as we all know, life continues to pile on stressors. So EFT can work miraculously quickly when you don't have a lot of layers to a trauma. However, it also, life is always throwing us curveballs. So I kind of always talk about EFT like the difference between going to a dentist and brushing your teeth every day. So you go to a dentist to get like that deep cleaning. So this particular client had experienced a traumatic event where her daughter almost drowned in a pool. And she was rescued, but she had been down at the bottom for a while before anyone even realized she was there. And it was a very harrowing experience for this client. And after that, she really had a hard time taking her kids swimming, taking them near any bodies of water. She was very anxious about her kids all the time, as you can imagine. And so we did one single tapping session where we tapped through that story. And every time she hit a new point in the story, I really, really broke it down. Minutia, I want to point out, like really breaking it down. Anytime she hit a point where she had that physiological reaction, we stopped, we tapped using that phrase, that last thing that she had just said in the storytelling, and until it was neutral, and until we could get through the story start to finish where she felt completely emotionally neutral about it. I have kept in touch with her. It's been at least, I think it's been 8 years now. She says the anxiety around that never came back, and she was able to take her kids and do, typical water
And
activities
this
with
took
kids.
one day. That's what you're saying.
That
This
was
took one
one
day.
session, one session. But it also didn't have a lot of childhood roots for her. It was just, a
Small
single
things.
trauma. Yes.
Right.
And so that is kind of the difference. Even if, let's say, she had had an experience herself of almost drowning or some other kind of trauma as a child, it probably would have taken more than one session. But when it's sort of a single incident trauma, particularly when it happens to you as an adult, you can clear it that quickly. Now, at the same time, she also tells me that she uses EFT on the regular now as just a way of clearing her ongoing stress and just helping her to feel better. And I know personally, when I started tapping, I did it originally. I was listening to a broadcast of something called the Tapping World Summit. And so I did it 10 days in a row. I listened along, I tapped along to the different interviews that they were having with different experts on tapping. And at the end of the 10 days, I remember that my kids wanted to go out and play in the snow, and they were little at the time. And normally I would find that very annoying. And I would have to get them all dressed in the warm clothes and go out there and, knowing I'd have to do all the laundry when they came back in. And it was night and it was cold, and I don't like being cold. And, but for whatever reason, this night they asked, and I said, sure, yeah, let's go. And I bundled them up and I put them outside, and they immediately started throwing snowballs at each other, things that normally I would have gotten upset and yelled, don't do that to your brother. And, you know, instead, I found myself sitting on my front porch. I had brought out a cup of tea, and I'll never forget this because I watched them play. And instead of yelling at them, I felt such peace and presence. And I watched the steam rising up off my tea. And I watched the snowflakes slowly coming down. And I felt amazing. I felt completely present in my body. And sure enough, what did they do? They started to shift from fighting to playing. And next thing I know, they were laughing. And I didn't have to get all upset and uptight and break the fun. And they figured it out. And at that moment, I thought, wow, I feel amazing. This must be that tapping thing. I realized that after 10 days of tapping, my system, my parasympathetic nervous system had been turned on a lot of the time during the day, a lot more than normal. And so I was just feeling more relaxed. And as time has gone on, I've been doing this now. I originally got trained in 2014. Over the years, I find that I am way less reactive. I really was a yeller at my kids when they were younger, and I really don't anymore. And I haven't for many years. And I just like go with the flow, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Even yesterday, my boyfriend was late for the airport, getting to the airport, and he was going to make me late for an appointment. And he said, I'm hustling, I'm doing the best I can. And I said, I know. And later he said, wow, do you know how many people would have like blown up and lost their temper and gotten mad? I was like, well, look, I knew you were doing the best you could. And I do think that I just live sort of a more chilled out existence because I do tapping on the regular. So that is one message I definitely want to get across to your listeners, because it is a self-help tool and it's literally at your fingertips. It's right here, and you can do it anytime. You can
Any
do it
day, and you think
any
any day, and you
day.
should do it every day too. But my question originally was like, how could we incorporate it daily? So
Yeah.
so I'm trying to understand, like, person who wants to try EFT, and obviously they can find the videos online
Yeah.
and everything, but
Yep.
I want to hear from an expert like you who is listening to this podcast. How can they incorporate this in daily life without, like, burden too much, starting out, they're trying to,
Exactly.
like how could they do that?
Yes, yes. So I always tell my clients, stay away from should, right? Because when we say, oh, I should do it every day, then it creates this guilt and this shame if we don't. And so start with saying, I could do it every day, and make it really simple. If you want to be scheduled about it, that's great. There is this thing called the personal peace procedure where you basically take a journal and you write out all the things that are bothering you. You just free write as many things as you want. And then you look at your list and you just pick one thing on your list and you tap and you set a timer. 5 minutes, maybe 10. I would not recommend tapping longer than 10 minutes. And you just tap on this. Even though my boss annoys me, I I accept myself anyway. And so then you just tap, my boss annoys me, my boss annoys me. And by the end of 5 to 10 minutes, you're going to feel less annoyed with your boss. You just will. And then that might even open up your mind to other possibilities, like a different way of looking at your boss or getting a different job or whatever. It helps move us out of our sort of like stuckness around our problems. So that's one way. However, I feel like that is really hard for people to commit to something every day like that. And it can feel like, oh, all I'm doing is focusing on my problems. So, what I like to suggest to people is to tap when you are already thinking about your problems. So, very common times. You're in the shower, right? A lot of us in the shower are ruminating in our minds of all the things that are bothering us or all the things we have to do that day. So, if you just tap while you're in the shower on these acupressure points, you don't have to say anything. We'll go over in a few minutes the words you say and the actual technique of how you do it. But if you are already in the emotion of what's bothering you and you tap, you're going to send that calming signal to the brain, shut it off, create the new neural pathway up here, and be able to problem solve better
So
around
you
it.
can do it while in shower too. That's what you're saying, like anytime.
Shower, I say, driving in the car, if you're stuck in traffic, a lot of times we're thinking about our problems, go
Yeah,
ahead and
but
tap.
obviously
You could
not
do it
while
one-handed.
driving. Obviously not
Right,
while driving.
right, right. One-handed, or you're sitting in traffic. If you are talking on the phone to a friend or a family member and you're already venting about your problems, that is a perfect time. Again, you can tap one-handed if you're holding the phone to your ear, and you can tap through the points. So anytime that you're just activated already and you're worked up, or I do remember times when my kids, they were young when I started. I think my youngest was 7. So they were 7 and 9 when I first learned this. And there were times in the car where, I'd be getting frustrated with them, or we're out shopping and I'd be getting angry and they'd say, Mom, you should tap now. And I was like, you're right. I should. And it's kind of frustrating to be told that by your kids, but they were right. And when I did tap in those moments, I went calm. And then I was able, when you are when you're angry or anxious, the blood actually flows away from your frontal lobe. We've seen this on brain scans, and it flows and it concentrates in our mid and hindbrains. So we are literally dumber when we are angry or anxious than when we are not, because you cannot access the good part of your brain, the logic, reason, judgment part of your brain, when that blood flow isn't there. What tapping does is it sends the blood back to that part of your brain, so you calm down. It's a survivalistic thing. When our bodies have been created to, when we feel there's a threat, to go into fight, flight, or freeze. So the blood concentrates in the part of our brain that is responsible for fight, flight, or freeze. When we are able to calm down, that's why deep breathing can also work. When you deep breathe, you send the blood back up here, and suddenly you can think more clearly and you can come up with a better solution to your problem, oftentimes, once you're thinking more clearly and once you're more calm.
So, one thing that has, since we started this episode, and we've been recording, one thing that has been very distracting is the thing behind there. So let's get into that. Let's dive into your best-selling book, like that is Find Love Again. What a title it is. So, what inspired you to write that book, and how
Mhm.
does it connect to spirituality or maybe perhaps EFT or science in the
Mhm.
context of relationships, as that book is about that. So can you and also talk about a little bit about that content of the book? What is that book about?
Yeah. So I went through a divorce myself in my early 40s. And when I began dating again and looking for another relationship, I realized pretty quickly how helpful EFT tapping was going to be in helping me to find healthier and healthier partners. Whenever someone has a failed relationship or a failed marriage, the last thing you want to do is repeat that pattern. However, what most of us end up doing is repeating those patterns because they're very deeply entrenched in us. And so I talk about you end up dating the same person in a different body sometimes, right? And a lot of people don't even realize it until they're too far in. Um, a lot of us, attraction tends to be a pretty subconscious thing. So we just kind of feel attracted to someone and we just start dating them, right? So when I wrote the book, what I realized was I have all this knowledge, both as a psychotherapist, and I know a lot, obviously, about brain and neuroscience, and as an EFT practitioner. And I could really help a lot of single women. I specifically work with women at midlife who are divorced or widowed and having to begin the dating process again. However, the principles that I teach are applicable to anybody dating. And the way the book is written is as a guide. I do teach you specifically how to use EFT. And then each chapter, I teach a lesson that is important to learn and understand to attract in a healthier relationship. And at the end of that chapter, I have a tapping script for that specific thing. So, for example, one of the chapters, I talk about how it's about a journey, not a destination. So, if you go out there dating, very anxious to just find your next partner, find the one. So you kind of show up energetically on dates like, are you the one? Are you the one? And that's not a very attractive vibe, right? That's like, there's a little bit of a desperate kind of vibe and a little bit of an anxiety, and I'm going to sink my claws into you kind of vibe. That is not really a turn on for most potential partners, right? So if you can tap on your anxiety about, I got to find my next partner and I got to find him quickly, and you can clear that anxiety, then you can start to see dating as a journey rather than a destination. And with each date you go on, it's an opportunity for you. This is where it's the more spiritual part of the book, is an opportunity for you to learn about yourself and for you to gain knowledge. And it can be something silly. Like I just learned that I really like, I don't know, mussels or caviar or something, right? Something that you try. Or it can be, I really learned that I am willing to sit with someone who nonstop talks about themselves. And wow, maybe I need to set a boundary around that because that's not really the kind of partner I want to be with, right? So you just start to go on the dates as a learning tool. What am I going to learn about myself in this process? And suddenly it takes the pressure off. And it also helps you get really clear about what it is you are looking for. And rather than just, oh, I feel chemistry, so I'm going to date this person, you start to get like clarity around what kind of partner do I want to be with when you're not anxious about, oh my God, I don't want to grow old alone, right? So you tap on that anxiety, clear it, and suddenly you're dating from a much different place from
The
a,
perspective is very clear on who you should, so that dust does not that anxiety is not there while selecting. Often we do that, as you say,
exactly,
we commit that mistake selecting with our inner fears. We select this partner, and this is one who will take that away, but he doesn't. He brings even more energy to that fear. But
exactly.
one question that is coming into my mind is that like practically, can you tell me an example like how EFT tapping, because you just talked about it, can help like these individuals? And because of the book title is called Find Love Again. So
Hmm.
with love, it is not always romantic. Sometimes it
Hmm.
could be your parents, your brother, sister, or even
Hmm.
friends, I would say. So why not?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even there, that could be that. So find love again. So how could you EFT tapping can help individual clear blocks? And I
Hmm.
would say I would use the word unhealthy subconscious
Yep.
patterns related to love and these all family or love relationships. How could
Right.
EFT tapping help in that?
Yeah. Well, so I think EFT tapping, that's the gift of it, right? Is that it really can clear these subconscious blocks. Carl Jung was famous for saying, you must bring the unconscious subconscious, or else it will run your life. And I think that that's really true. Most of us are just running through our daily lives operating from these subconscious programs, and we don't even realize it. And so I actually have a great story, and it is a dating story, but I've certainly had clients that have talked about their friendships improving, their family relationships improving from clearing some of their relationship um, unhealthy patterns as they've done the work with me. This particular story was a woman who lived in a high rise building for 8 years. And during the time that she lived in this building, she was dating men who did not treat her well. I will just sum it up by saying jerk after jerk after jerk. Okay. And she, at first was just unaware of this and just was, oh, I'm so in love and this is, my next guy or whatever. And then she started to observe that, whoa, there's a pattern here and it's not a good pattern. And so she started doing the work, and she did tapping and she did Reiki and she did a lot of self help techniques. But as she cleared her patterns around wanting to, as she cleared her patterns around being attracted to men who didn't treat her well, she realized there were childhood roots to this. There were times that she wasn't treated so well by her father. So in her brain, the subconscious pattern became love is not being treated well. Love is hot and cold, emotional. Or lack of emotional availability. So, as she cleared those patterns, something really interesting happened. One day, she got on the elevator of her building that she had lived in all these years, and there was this handsome guy, and they started talking. And he asked her out for coffee, and they went out for coffee, and they totally hit it off. And she realized very quickly, wow, he is completely different from anybody else I've ever dated. And he's super adoring and attentive and emotionally very, open hearted. And she was like, wow, I think I actually did enough work that I've cleared these subconscious blocks and I attracted in a different kind of person. But here's where it gets really interesting. There's a part of our brain called the reticular activating system, and that part of our brain is responsible for seeing and identifying patterns. So let's say you decide, okay, I want to buy a red Corvette. All of a sudden, you start seeing red cars or Corvettes or whatever on the road, right? I mean, that just we can all kind of relate to that. That's because of our reticular activating system. It actually tunes into and sees different things based on your cognitive bias and your expectation. So, with this woman, when she found emotionally unavailable guys attractive, she was tuning into them wherever she was and she was seeing them. Once she did the work and she kind of cleared that old pattern out and realized that emotional unavailability isn't actually love, then she saw this guy. A few months into their dating, you know what he said to her? He said, I've been seeing you in the elevator for 8 years, and I always wanted to talk to you, but you never seemed very open, so I didn't approach you. And I've seen a picture of this guy. He's an objectively handsome guy.
8 years?
So her reticular activating system for 8 years never saw that guy. She didn't even realize he lived in her building for 8 years until he told her that.
Eight
She
years?
never saw that
That's
guy.
crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
And what happened
So
after that?
they're still together. They got married. They're, sort of live happily ever after, as far as I know. So, yeah.
That's a
So
crazy story.
it's a crazy story. And I love to tell it because I work with a lot of women who are in their 40s and 50s who feel like, oh, there's no good guys left out there. And, I've just got to take what I can get, kind of settle for less than I want kind of thing, because that's what their reticular activating system is telling them. That's what it's showing them. But there are good single available partners out there for people. There are healthy relationships out there for you. Once you do enough of the work and clear those subconscious patterns, your brain will start to see those people. And they could be at your gym, they could be at your grocery store, they could be right in your neighborhood, and you're not even seeing them because that's not what you're tuning into right now.
It's like that. I'll share a really example that coming to mind, I hope that fits into what we were talking, is that you're on the road, you see, like, I live in India, for example. So the roads are more busier, in the big countries, Asian countries, the roads are busier because the population higher. The American roads are not that busy, unless you go to Las Vegas, or Californian roads. Those are like filled with cars. Or if you go to New York City, if you go to Times Square, there's so many cars, taxis, all of that, and you just walk on the road, you don't notice. Everything is
Hmm.
unnoticed. Maybe that,
Yeah.
what do you call, the red Corvette goes and passes, you never notice. You think, oh, you're in your own world. But the very moment that blockage is cleared, that car goes, and instantly your instinctively look. It's just instinctive, and
Yeah.
you start seeing all the things. You see the posters, you see everything is
Yes.
present that is attracting to you now. So, and we
Exactly.
attract that, you know.
Hmm.
But I had a question that not a lot of people don't ask. I don't think. I'm not sure if you have been asked this, but you talked about single 40 to 50-year-old females trying
Hmm.
having hard time to find partners. But with women, they have a lot of options. It's often the case because they are women. But with man, it is always a big issue. So I want to understand this, because you're a psychotherapist. I want to
Hmm.
understand this psychology from the man's perspective as well. What do guys go through when they have a kid, when they are single in their 40s? And because you live
Hmm.
in America, there are a lot of potential guys who are single. You're dating your own self. So
Yeah.
what is that mindset from the guys in the age of 40, and what are their patterns? Because both of them have different patterns in their own subjective. They have a different
Hmm.
psychology, different expectations from this relationship that they do. So can you talk about the men's psychology a little bit?
Well, I definitely specialize in working with women because I feel like I obviously am a woman and I was a divorced woman who dated around a lot. And so I use my own experience in the work that I do. And as I've been doing this work, I have met and befriended a lot of other dating coaches, male dating coaches. And I actually did a podcast with a female dating coach who works specifically with men. So I've been given more insight, and I have been told, oh, you should write the male version of your book, because the full title is Find Love Again, Learn to Date Like a Goddess. Right. And so people said, oh, you should write Find Love Again, Learn to Date Like a God. And I do hesitate because I am not a guy and I don't know that. But what I will say is that I do feel, especially from talking to my male dating coach colleagues, that it's not really that different, right? I mean, a lot of it comes down to self worth and self deservedness. And if you subconsciously do not feel worthy of being loved for who you are, then you will push love away, and or you will attract in partners who will treat you as though you're unworthy. I had a client just yesterday where we were talking about her childhood trauma and how the things that she has been through as a kid. Let me put it this way: very chaotic, unhealthy family that she still interacts with, she still has to deal with. She's embarrassed of, and she's embarrassed to bring a potential partner around. I think a guy could have that same issue. And if you are at all ashamed of something in your life, whether it's your family, your job, your house, anything that you have shame around, you are not going to want to bring someone in. So you're going to kind of keep people at a distance or be guarded or be sort of emotionally walled off potentially. Meanwhile, the ironic thing is the perfect partner for you, the perfect ideal person is going to love you not in spite of those things that you're ashamed of, but actually because of those things. Your perfect partner is going to see your flaws and
Yeah.
love you for them.
That's such a great thing you say, and I'm glad someone highlighted it. This thing is so right when it comes to love, that often we think this is our flaw, but that's the flaw that attracts our partners, that's the thing they find vulnerable in us, and they, this
Right.
is something, everybody has that, and this is what
Right.
make us what I call humans, and
Right.
and even
Right.
we cannot say about the God, because we assume God to be this perfect omnipotent being, but in terms of humanity, in humans, we are imperfect in our flaws, but that is the beauty, that is something we love to, and happy with. So
Right.
so
And I say, if you're dating someone who, you feel like you can't be your true self around, you will never experience true deep love and true deep intimacy. And so the only path, honestly, to very, very deep love and a very intimate connection is actually through your flaws. You have to be able to take off the mask and, and just let someone see you fully and completely for who you are. And if you allow your partner to see you fully and completely, and they don't respond well to that, that is not your person. I promise you that is not your person. Move on from that relationship, because you will find someone who will love you for all of what you consider your junk, and that's going to actually be the best relationship of your life.
it's a great thing that you said, and I like. So, for our listeners who maybe, they have been hearing this episode and they're intrigued by what you said about EFT, and they're really excited to try this thing out and see their transformative changes in it. What practical tips, or maybe exercise, or like, how do they start, and what do you recommend, them to incorporate in their daily life? What can you show us a little bit, because we are doing this video which is providing
Sure.
us, and people who are listening to the audio can always come back to the video and see. So can you share us a practical
Yep.
exercise that people can start doing today, if someone is first time trying EFT?
Yep. So I always give the caveat that don't try to work on a big trauma right away. Maybe not even by yourself. It really can be helpful. I work with a practitioner, and it can be really helpful to work on that with someone else, because one of the things is if you start working on something big, you can kind of like crack open yourself emotionally, and then you might be like weepy all day or something. So you don't want to do that. So we always start with something small to just kind of show you that it works, and it starts to take the edge off, and then you can start to get deeper into the practice. So one example I always love to do is to think of a time, and so anyone listening, think of a time recently in the last few days where you were annoyed by something or someone, and just sort of tune into that. And on a scale of 1 to 10, kind of put a number on it. How annoyed were you? Was it a 5, an 8, a 10? Just kind of think about that. And don't overthink it, by the way. And then once you have that number, I want you to start tapping on the side of your hand. So the side of your hand under your pinky knuckle, the fleshy side. Sometimes we call it the karate chop point, because it's where someone would maybe like chop a board of wood, right? So you take the fingertips of your one hand and you start tapping on the fleshy side of your other hand. And and it doesn't matter. People always ask me, which hand do you use? It doesn't matter. And so here we say a statement, and we say it 3 times. And the statement is going to be something where we pair the problem with some kind of statement of acceptance, because ironically, the road to all change in mental health is through accepting ourselves exactly as we are. And anyone who's tried to willpower their way through a problem knows that that doesn't really work too well. But when you accept yourself, then it kind of loosens you up to change. So when we say the statement, we're just basically trying to prime our brain to like, it's okay, brain. Yes, we're going to try to change you right now, but it's okay. Okay. So that's kind of what this does. So you just tap along. And in EFT, generally, the practitioner leads the tapping, and then the listener or the person doing it will echo back. So if you want, you can be my echo back voice, and we can just show everybody how it works using this example of
So
annoyance.
let's use a practical example. Yes, you can conduct like a session. So
Hmm.
let's say uh, I have a neck pain.
Okay.
Okay, and it's been there for a year, Doctors have
Hmm.
tried, it is not that working, and but it's going to take time. And can we see if EFT works here? So let's try with that.
Okay, sure. So on a scale of 1 to 10, what number would you give the neck pain?
I would honestly, I don't have it. So, but
Oh, okay.
okay, but I would use the number, let's say 8 for this example.
Okay. So then what you would do is start by tapping on the side of the hand.
Which hand doesn't matter? Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. The research has shown either way works. So whatever feels more comfortable to
So
you.
if
So you tap.
I use the left hand. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So yeah. So I'm using my right hand to tap on my left hand. I am a lefty. So, and then you just start tapping there. And you just say, even though I have this pain in my neck,
Even though I have this pain in my neck,
I accept myself completely.
I accept myself completely.
And we're going to say it 2 more times. Even though I do have this pain in my neck,
Even though I do have this pain in my neck,
I accept that it's there.
I accept that it's there.
Even though I have this pain in my neck
Even though I have pain in this neck
and I don't want it,
and I don't want it,
I accept myself
I accept myself
and my body
and my body
anyway.
anyway.
Now you move your fingertips to the inside of your eyebrow, right where the bridge of the nose and the eyebrow meet, and you just say, this pain in my neck.
This pain in my neck.
Now you move outside the eyes to the little bone on the outer part of your eye, this pain in my neck.
This pain in my neck.
Then you move under the eyes, right to the bony ridge underneath your pupil, this pain in my neck.
This pain in my neck.
The next point is under the nose where the upper lip and nose meet, this pain in my neck.
This pain in my neck.
And then you go to the crease in your chin below your lip, this pain in my neck.
This pain in my neck.
And then you go, the next point, we call it the collarbone, but it's actually below the bone. So you go to the hollow in your neck, the little hollow there. You go down about 1 inch and over about 2. And there's 2 little dents right below your bone. And you tap there. This one you do want to tap both hands, or I can do this thumb and finger trick if I'm driving one-handed. And you say, this pain in my neck.
This pain in my neck.
And then the second to last point is just under the arm, a few inches below the armpit on the rib cage, this pain in my neck.
This pain in my neck.
And the last point is just at the top of the head. It's also known as the crown chakra. And it is where all the meridians in the body cross over. And you say, this pain in my neck.
This pain in my neck.
And then you take a deep breath. For those of you tapping along, you hopefully feel a little more relaxed now, whether or not you had a pain in your neck. And typically people are going to report that their number has dropped
And you can
a
always
little or sometimes a lot.
listen to this again and try with different. I think this could work with a lot of things. Allison, if I'm getting that right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think too, it's so interesting that you brought up pain in your neck, because it definitely works with physical pain, but it's working on the emotional component, right? And so a lot of times our physical pain, we might feel frustrated that we have it. We might feel resentful of how it came to be. We might feel angry at ourselves that um, we haven't gotten over it yet or whatever, right? So when you're tapping, what you're actually doing is clearing those emotions. But a lot of times that can release the physical pain. And so also, though, sometimes the physical pain that's manifesting in our body might have an emotional root. So if you're having a pain in your neck and you tap like that and it didn't really work very well, you might want to think about what in your life feels like a pain in your neck. Is there a person or a situation, or right? Because we use these phrases and we use them for a reason, right? There's like, oh, this person is a pain in my neck, or this job is a pain in my neck. Then you might want to tap on that, and you'll be surprised to see a lot of times the physical pain will then disappear after that.
So, we did this method right now, like a trial session that we did right now, EFT might be met with some skepticism by some. And how do you, as a practitioner, like, because you have that degree, you are educated, and you have been doing this for a while, how do you address skepticism, and what would you say to those who are hesitant to try EFT? People are like that. So, can you
Mhm.
talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, anyone can go to where I was trained, EFTuniverse.com, and look on their um, homepage, and there's connections to all the research that's been done. So if you are curious, you're a science type, and you want to see, were these double blind controlled studies? Yes, they were. And there's lots of them, and you can go right there and look and take a peek at that. So that's one thing. And then for the other thing, I would say just try it. I've convinced most people of it by simply trying it, and they experience results, and they experience results very quickly. One of the other things it can work really good on is food cravings, because again, there's a lot of emotional roots with food cravings. And I had a very good friend who for about 7 years was pretty skeptical of EFT, never really wanted to do it, wasn't super open to it. And one day, she had a massive thing for M&Ms. She loved M&Ms, and she kept saying, "Oh, I should tap with you on that, so I'd stop eating so much M&Ms." And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it, let's do it." But she just wouldn't do it, wouldn't do it. So then one day we were doing a promo for her yoga studio in this class I was teaching there, and so I sort of ambushed her, and I brought the M&Ms, and I said, we're doing it today, live on camera." And so I started tapping with her. Typically, tapping on a food takes 3 or 4 rounds before the food starts to not taste so good or lose its flavor or whatever. But with her, it was 2 rounds, 2 rounds. And M&M's, she said, tasted like soap. And she was blown away. She was completely shocked. I was a little surprised too that it went that quickly. And what she has said to me since, now this has been a couple years, is that she has never had an M&M since. Her body just doesn't want to. At a subconscious level, she cleared out her craving and her desire for it. So she just doesn't reach for them anymore.
Can
And
you can you show us
so
the
to me,
can
it's
you show us the book cover once?
sure, absolutely. Here is the book.
It's really nice.
Like I said, it has very explicit instructions in there of how to tap, along with a link to a video. Anyone can go to my
So,
website
who
at
would
Learn
you
to Date Like
recommend
a
this?
Goddess.
Who would you recommend this book to? Who's listening to this? Who would you recommend this book to get?
Anyone who is dating and struggling with dating,
Male
anyone
as well.
who,
Male as well.
I think males could learn a lot from it as well. I have had some single guy friends read it who said that it was very helpful and insightful to them to, one, understand the perspective of the women that they're trying to date, and two, that they, realize some of the things that I talk about in there are just as applicable to guys as it is to women.
So, you know, how important, because we talked about EFT, not a practice, how important is community or people's support in trying to incorporate something like EFT, you think, in someone's journey if they're trying to incorporate this as a daily practice?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think with any daily practice, when we have others helping hold us accountable, it's easier, right? Like right now, my boyfriend and I are actually doing a 21-day tapping challenge. And we're not doing it every day because it's honestly, you shift so much emotional material that sometimes it's a little much to do it every day. But so we're doing it every 3 or 4 days, but we're doing it together, and we're going through this. It's a book by Nick Ortner is the author, and it's about sort of manifesting your greatest life or something. And so we're just clearing out one day at a time together. We're doing the tapping because if I just was doing it on my own, I might let it peter off, or so we do that. I teach a group class. I have an online class for learning to date like a goddess, where I teach a group of women together, and we tap together, because sometimes the problem with subconscious blocks is they're subconscious, right? You might not realize this is your thing, but when you're tapping with a group of other women who are also going through a lot of similar things, and one of them brings up, "Oh, my issue is I'm afraid of dying alone," you start tapping with her on her issue, and all of a sudden you realize, "Oh, that was my issue too." So it can be really helpful. I've also done the food. I have a 11 days to a lighter you EFT tapping for weight loss program, and I've done that in a group too. And I've really had major
How could this
breakthroughs
help
from
in
women.
how could this help in weight loss? Because you mentioned about this before during our conversation. Can it help in weight
Yeah,
loss? How is that possible?
yeah, yeah. It helps in the same way because there are subconscious blocks that are keeping your weight in place or keeping your unhealthy eating in place or keeping your lack of exercise in place. I know for me, when I first I did a program myself, which is how I then created my own program, where I used EFT tapping for exercise resistance. And I realized that as a kid, gym class at school was a really negative experience for me. And so as an adult, I really didn't like exercise because I had all this negative story in my head about exercise. So once I cleared out those old memories, suddenly I enjoy exercise and I like it and it's fun and it's not this dreaded thing that it used to be. For food, in my tapping for weight loss group, one of the women realized that the reason she kept craving desserts was she was Iranian living here in America. And she was like, I make all my Iranian desserts because I'm homesick. And eating those reminds me of home and it makes me feel good. And she only got to that because one of the other women in the group was talking about how, she ate desserts because it reminded her of growing up in her childhood and things like that. And so these two women, once they both realized, well, it's not actually the food we're craving, it's the feeling of home that we're craving. And so then they were able to stop overeating the desserts, and they instead figured out ways to implement more connection to family, trips back home, things like that, like other ways to connect with home. I have another example of a client I worked with who realized that part of her weight struggle was she was having big Starbucks, very sugary Starbucks drinks every day that were really adding a lot of calories, sort of empty calories to her diet. But she couldn't seem to give it
I
up
am
because she was
hungry.
like, start tapping. Right. So she couldn't give it up because she was like, that's how I treat myself. I treat myself with like, I feel like I'm doing something nice for myself by getting myself this Starbucks. But once we tapped, remember that frontal lobe kicks in and you problem solve better. And she all of a sudden said, you know what? Instead of spending whatever the crazy amount it is these days, $6 a day on a cup of coffee, she said, I could instead save up all 5 days of that and I could get myself a manicure once a week and still feel like I'm treating myself without the empty calories and for the same amount of money. And so that's what she started doing instead. And then it was easier for her to maintain her weight because she wasn't having so many empty calories in her drinks anymore.
So, as we are close to wrapping this episode up, I had one question that I should ask you, and most of the listeners who are going to try this, who are maybe here to listen your story, your journey, which is quite interesting. You're learning this, and it's so many things. And this book is really interesting, because people are looking for great relationships, trying to build one, and perhaps we could do another episode just for relationships, maybe. But today we discussed about EFT in detail because that was
Mhm.
required, so we can tell people there's such a method that exists. But my question that as we wrap up this slowly and slowly, what advice or inspiration would you give or offer to individuals who are on a journey of personal growth and transformation? What advice would you give them?
My advice would be that if you're feeling stuck, that is the greatest gift that you could actually have in your life because whatever you are stuck with, whatever is your trigger, is your most needed healing next on your path. And with a tool like EFT tapping, it makes the healing go much more quickly. But even if you don't want to try EFT tapping, just realize that whatever is the biggest pain in your neck right now in your life is actually the thing that you really need to delve into and heal the most. That will be your greatest gift for up leveling your life.
That's a great advice, and as we wrap up, my final question is that because you're doing such interesting work, and somebody has told you to write a book for the men, and you should definitely, I would recommend that too, because but you need to maybe conduct more research with it and
Hmm.
meet some men who can give you practical help for that book's knowledge. But uh, would you like to share anything to the listeners who are more interested to know about you? How could they connect with you? And at the same time, are you excited for any initiative or upcoming projects that you would like to talk about that's going to be upcoming in your life that you are really excited about?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, one thing I do offer all my listeners of my podcast interviews is if you go to my website at learntodatelikeagoddess.com, you can actually download a free copy of the book. So you can check it out yourself and play around with the tapping scripts and see if that speaks to you. So that's one thing I like to offer. And then the next big upcoming thing that I have is I am going to be starting the online Date Like a Goddess course in January again. I haven't run it now for a few weeks, so I'm excited to get back into it. And I know that New Year is a great time. People are looking for love. They're ready to do the work, to do the personal healing work that is necessary to call in that next great love. So again, if they go to that website of mine or inspiredlifetapping.com, all the information's there for the book and for my groups and for anything that you have any questions or want to ask me anything. I'm really available, and I love talking about EFT, and I love opening people up to it because it has changed my life so much. I've seen it change so many others' lives, and so I really want to spread the word.
Yeah, you have such a positive energy about EFT and all of this knowledge. And definitely, you said about a course. Also, think about a podcast. That could be a nice thing too. Date Like a Goddess
Yeah,
podcast.
I know a lot of people brought that up to me. I am going to Podfest, which is a big conference in Florida in February to kind of maybe explore the option and just to meet other podcasters
I'm one
and
of
I do
them.
love doing this. So yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, it
Podcasts are
is
fun.
fun, and people
Yeah.
like to consume information than read these
Hmm.
days, but practically they can understand and see you who you really are. Because while reading, you cannot know the person's real intentions, can you? But sometimes when
Hmm.
you watch this person let him or her talk and see a little bit what is their intention, what is their energy feel like. Even though you're watching it virtually, you could feel their intentions, and you have a very positive one. That's what I feel. But I'll leave that to the listeners. And remember that you're watching this podcast. This is a Luvo original podcast, which is available on the Luvo app and across all platforms. Here you find healing meditations, yoga, chakra healing, and maybe we heard about the EFT tapping. So these exclusive content is coming from the Luvo original in-house. So do check out the app. It's a great app and it will help you to boost your personal growth and transformation and help you in that. That's the very purpose of this app. And I thank you so much for coming on the show, Allison. You've shared so much light, and I think you opened up a new dimension of knowledge with this EFT thing, because I never known about it. You're the first person who told me. I knew about the acupuncture, okay, but maybe it was related to EFT, maybe because I heard about it a few years ago. But this is something you cleared
Hmm.
it up a lot of myths and help me to understand it. So thank you so much for joining us today on Zest to Live, and thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.